We're ready? We're good. All right. So again, if you have some questions, you can text them into me, and I'll help you get to them. All right. I think our first question is for Dr. DiCarlo. Mm-hmm. And you may have already answered this. I'm just reading it because that's the question that I want to honor the question. So you can just, if you've already answered it, you can reiterate it a little bit. But tonight, the discussion for tonight was meaning without a maker. And the question was this: the important word, at least to this audience member, the important word tonight is meaning, the word meaning. And this person's asking, how can you say there is meaning and then also say we're here by sheer luck? And you addressed it a little bit at the end of your talk, and maybe just reiterate it.
Yeah, sure. So the difference between ultimate meaning and proximal meaning is, basically the difference between our worldviews. Since I haven't found any ultimate purpose to my being here or anyone else's being here, what I do then is I can look at my life and the lives of those of whom I come in contact with throughout the world, and find meaning on this particular planet. And the meaning then derives itself from contextual issues. So ultimately, any proximal feelings I get that I consider to be meaningful may ultimately be reduced to, forces of nature, particles bumping into each other, molecules and neurotransmitters behaving in particular ways. And my response to that is, so what? If that's the case, there's not a lot I can do about it. I'm going to enjoy the ride, because as a skeptic, that's simply all I can do.
Dan, could I come in?
Sure, yeah, for sure.
I almost answered the question at the very, very beginning, because it would have short-circuited the whole evening over in 2 minutes. Is there meaning without a maker? Of course. Sociologically, nobody can live without some meaning. Everyone wants to make sense of life and find security in the world. So whatever worldview people believe in, they will find that the source of their meaning. But Chris, the only thing I differ was, our meaning is not all supernatural. The wonderful thing about the Christian life, it gives you deeper, richer, what you call proximal meaning too. And, a poet like Gerard Manley Hopkins, where simple things come to life as part of the creation of God, and so on, and the beauty and grandeur of the universe. So what you're saying is very like Bertrand Russell. There's no meaning out there. So like Atlas, we make our own meaning, carrying it on our own shoulders, but don't think too deeply, because the so what will come pretty fast if you think too deeply. Whereas ours goes from the inner the whole way out. And that is a huge difference, far more all-encompassing. It is, if the Christian faith is true, the very meaning of the universe itself. It's not just my man-made, Frank Sinatra, I do it my way, type of proximal meaning. It's pretty small.
One thinker talked about humanity and human beings being meaning-maker machines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, meaning-mongers.
And it sounds like part of the difference between is the idea of is there objective meaning to us, or is it just simply subjective? Mm-hmm. Is the meaning we create, or is there meaning without a maker? We'll probably get into that as we get into some more questions. Dr. Guinness, your last point in your talk, you spoke about what a civic public square would look like. And this person's asking, what would a civic public square look like when it comes to today's, hot button, hot potato issues? They give the example of, for example, secularists want the right to marry whoever they want, while Christians have long been fighting to restrict the definition of marriage to one man and one woman for life. How would it play out when we come together and in the civil square? How would your
Well, remember, we're talking about civil public square. We're talking about our religious ideological differences, the diversity at that level, which is the all-encompassing worldviews we're facing life. Now, if we all have freedom of conscience there, in public life, you'll be arguing for whatever you feel is right in public life. And public life is where we decide and deliberate issues of our common life together. So, obviously in a democracy, whoever wins prevails. And you can see that down, the abolition of slavery or the gay triumph over same-sex marriage. If they win that debate in public life, the question then becomes, and this touches Canada, say, over assisted suicide, touches America over same-sex marriage, how do you allow dissenters? Do you allow conscientious objection? And at the moment, there are voices in Canada and there are voices in America which want to squelch conscientious objection. That is highly illiberal and totally dangerous. In a diverse society, we may be on the losing end if everyone votes the other way. That's now the law. But we should have the right to a conscientious objection.
Mm-hmm. As long as we're on the same page with the separation of church and state, I'm down with that. Once the church starts to influence the state, then I don't know if we can have fairness, because democracy rules best in a secular fashion. That way we get to please as many people as possible. It's utilitarian and it's democratic. You get to maintain your faith. I get to maintain my non-faith. But as long as we have principles and laws and guidelines that allow us certain types of freedoms and privileges and whatnot, yep, absolutely, I'm down with that.
Sure. But remember, separation of church and state goes back to the scriptures. And it was pre-Enlightenment. And so I believe strongly in the separation of church and state.
Good.
But it should save the state from the power of religion, and it should also save religion from the power of the state. Works both ways.
It does, but it gets really, devil is in the details, as it were.
Yep.
If we're talking about doctor-assisted death, physician-assisted death, and say there are some physicians who are of a faith who don't wish to do that, should the rule basically be, okay, you don't have to do that, but like every other procedure, you need to refer that person to somebody else? Those physicians are now saying, no, even the act of referring goes against my faith. So those nuances are going to have to be worked out.
If that becomes law, and there are enough doctors who will do it,
right,
there should be the right of conscientious objection to those who cannot do that.
Sure, as long as we're thinking also about the patient as well.
No, that's what I said, as long as you have the right, the access to.
Correct.
We got agreement, we can go home. No.
No, I said I hope on these issues
Well, that's what you're saying.
We can be co-belligerents. I think it's very important that we are, and we don't perpetuate the so-called culture warring, which are damaging the West enormously.
Yes.
We can be excited about, or learn from history about the merging of church and state could do atrocious evil. Atrocious evil. The merging of a institutionalized unbelief and state could also do.
Oh, yes.
It has done.
Yeah, it really, can I just say, and we're probably on the same page. This is how I see things, right? I mean, if you imagine a y-axis and an x-axis here, and this is degree, and this is time, okay? And human action is measured according to harm on the bottom and tolerance on the top. As long as the degree of harm chugs along through time, and it's very, very low in degree, generally my tolerance is pretty high, right? And what we're all about here is once the harm increases, our tolerance tends to dip. And there's that intersecting point where we feel compelled to come out and say something, whether it's religiously motivated or from a secular point of view. Yeah.
Chris, the only thing I would say in terms of what you said there was, when a Mao or a Stalin did what they did, there was a logical consistency between their communist atheism and their policy, and it was murderous. I myself attacked the Inquisition or attacked the terrible abuse in Ireland or Boston, Spotlight and so on. But when the Catholic Church did that in Ireland or Italy or wherever, they were totally against Jesus. And that's why Pope John Paul II went out of his way to confess on behalf of the Church. That was vile. In other words, it was inconsistent to Jesus. So people have murdered in the name of Jesus. But even Machiavelli says Jesus himself is the unarmed prophet, whereas a certain gentleman from the Middle East is very definitely an armed prophet.
Just a point of interjection here. Did you find George W. Bush to be inconsistent to Jesus?
I'll put it this way. My book on American freedom under Bush was read by Jeb who got to the comments on W and put the book down because he didn't like any criticism of his brother. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another question. I think this one is directed toward Mr. DiCarlo, Dr. DiCarlo. And this is where it comes to I think this is some of the question Dr. Guiness was asking about the practicality. If there is no, should we say, objective meaning in life, if there's no meaning in life, you talk about proximal meaning, but if there's no objective meaning in life, why should I try to do good, and who defines good?
Mm-hmm. Right. I come from basically the school of thought is Pyrrhonism or ancient skepticism. When they looked out into the world, they didn't see any objective values or any objective means for determining who was right or who was wrong. Having realized that, they knew pretty much we're going to be on our own unless somebody comes up with this. So how are we going to make the best of this situation? They gave rise to the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, through the Enlightenment, and to the pragmatist thinkers of the U.S. So good to me is generally something that's pragmatic. It's something that works. And if we can get together on common values, and we strive towards those, and we best of all try to figure out if we come to some agreement about what our values are, then when people cannot reach the level of those values, those are the people we have to work hardest to try to understand and to rehabilitate. Right? Dostoevsky said, you can judge a city, a society, by its prisons, which is an amazing way to think about what do we do with the rule breakers. If we set the benchmarks of values to a certain level, and there are people who fail to reach those, in your worldview, Oz, you would pray for them, you would help them, you would ask for guidance from a specific creator and whatnot. In my worldview, we try to figure out what is going on in the entirety of that person and all the systems in which they are a part. Why can they not live up to those particular sets of values? Do we need to reconsider those values, or how do we best help that person? And I'm even talking about things like pedophilia. When a person wants to have sex with a child and we say that's wrong, and I've seen interviews with pedophiles and they say, you can lock me up for 10 years. The day I get out, I'll be back doing that. Again, okay, you may say that's a sinner. That person ought not to do that. They're a horrible person. Now, what if that's your son, or your brother, or your husband, or your father or uncle? And what if they truly cannot help it because the mechanisms of their physiology, of their neural substrates, sees the world in a particular way that is vastly different from the rest of us? How do we help that person? We don't simply condemn them or kill them because they're a human being. We can't just simply pray over them because we can't wait around for what I believe to be an imaginary God to intervene and change that person's ways, or that they'll somehow see the light.
The question, I think, was not only what do we do with someone who's done wrong,
right?
How do we identify pedophilia as wrong?
Oh, itself as wrong. Well, we measure, like I said, harm and tolerance. So if we put pedophilia as being very harmful, and then we list all our premises, all of our reasons for why that is harmful, and together as a society we say, yeah, probably not a good idea to, have sex with children, and we agree as a society that's one of our rules, okay, that's fine. So we make it one of our rules. And then we watch. If people cannot keep up with that particular rule in society because it has something to do with them, that is beyond their control. The question then, this is the subject of my next book, the question then is, how do we help them? Because they were somebody's kid, they are somebody's brother or uncle or whatever. We don't just kill them, they're not monsters. There's something going on in them that is beyond their capacity. The same with various types of behavior of certain types of actions. That's why I think we got to bring science to the table.
Sure.
Chris, there are people who are helped supernaturally. That's another discussion. But goodness, I'd put the point, Jan, can you be good without God? Of course. And for the Jew and the Christian, there's an understanding that an atheist, a Muslim, a Hindu, whatever, they are made in the image of God. And whether or not they know God, they're capable of incredibly good art or love for their wife or whatever it is. So there is goodness, because they're made in the image of God. So I'm never surprised when you see goodness. And so the fundamentalists who say, if you don't have God, you can't be good, I think that's wrong. The real question is, and even some of the atheists tackle this one, can you have a really good society? In other words, what are the sanctions when you have a whole society-wide? That's going to be the challenge of the future. So, Chris, I mean, you keep putting things in wonderfully reasonable ways. And I say you're a cut flower person. You're living off the whole Christian memory and so on. And so everything you say is wonderfully reasonable. But I'll never forget hearing Henry Kissinger talking about his father in Germany. And he said, my father's problem was he was a good man in a world in which goodness had no meaning. Now, Kissinger said, I will never make that mistake. And his almost cynical realpolitik went the other way in response to that. But we're moving. If we're right, this is a cut flower civilization. Some of the psychological confusion, some of the social chaos that's coming to your great-grandchildren, maybe, I think will be a different world unless there's a turning around. In other words, we are a cut flower civilization, and the West is still, the hangover of the Jewish and Christian faith is there, although many people will have rejected it. If we have the logic of Singer and Herbert Spencer and these people in a whole number of areas, it'll be a very different world to the wonderful one you're describing. That's my concern.
It's a good thing I'm here.
I think this is, it's Dr. Oz's turn. Maybe we'll do one of these where you can answer from his point of view. Because it's your turn to answer the question first, but it seems like it's coming from your talk. So
I'll answer from a Christian point of view.
Sure. I'll ask Dr. Oz, if our lives are without meaning, I'm trying to understand the question, why are we lucky? Well, you said we were lucky to exist.
Yeah.
But if our lives are without meaning, I'm asking this to Dr. Oz, but it is from your talk.
That's yours.
Maybe we're unlucky to exist, as some of the prophets said.
And some people
better
would
that
say
I had
that.
never been born.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm unlucky to have exist. After all, we are doomed to roam the world without a purpose. How would you?
No, I mean, Chris, this is you introduced us to this one. But take the Greek idea: those whom the gods love die young. Or take Schopenhauer or Samuel Beckett, great atheists. Beckett, existence itself is the error. That's radical. The thing is wrong inherently. Now, you talked about death, and I come in there. If you look at Jesus at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, he weeps. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. But 3 times it says in the Greek, Jesus was outraged. Now, a key part of the Christian view of evil, existence isn't the error. Something has gone wrong. Sin has come in. And so you could put it like this. It should have been otherwise. It's not the way it's supposed to be. So that if I grieve at the loss of a friend, that's not fear or despair. It's an inconsolable loss. I've lost someone who means everything to me. But you're recognizing something in this world, whether it's the torture of an animal or an innocent child, something is wrong. And that's a Christian view because of the fall. And many of the great atheists don't have that. Resistance is the error. Evil is natural. That's Camus, the myth of Sisyphus. You roll the stone up the hill, down it rolls again. Roll it up, down it rolls again. Why? I rebel, therefore I exist, because existence is the problem, not for the Christian.
See, I don't really see or accept the idea of sin, as you would imagine, because to me the whole notion of evil, when a person is evil, to me, the machinery is not working the way in which you want it to work. And in terms of luck and how the machinery may or may not work, let me define luck this way. It's the gap that lies between what you want to have happen and what will happen, as the difference between your values and the cold facts of reality, divided by the indifference of chance. That is what luck is.
Can you say that again?
Yes.
Because the math got me.
Okay. So what you want to have happen and what will happen, okay? So your values and facts divided by the indifference of chance. So over a period of time, we want things to happen because we have values, you know. We want, I was going to say the Leafs to win, but I'm in Ottawa. We want the Raptors to win. Are they playing right now?
They just started.
They just started?
Yep.
Do we have a score? We're 4 points ahead. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm keeping you from that game because I would surely like to see it.
Sports bar.
Sports bar after. Okay, right. These guys, he can't wait. This guy's going. He's out of here. DeRozan, I'm going. Lowry, I'm coming. So, yeah, we obviously have two different worldviews. The thing, Oz, is that in terms of a supernatural approach and how you define God and how you define Jesus within that context and the specific type of Christian that you are, because you mention other types of Christians who actually fostered the secular movement and that kind of thing.
By behaving unchristian.
By behaving very, very unchristian. I think, and please be aware of the fact that I do see value in world religions. It's not as though I'm against all world religions, that they should be shut out entirely and that sort of thing. But what I'm more interested in, where I see us intersecting, Oz, is personally, I don't know if Socrates ever existed or not. He may have, we have pretty good reason to believe, but there are some who maintain that he didn't. And there are those who maintain that Christ as a historical figure may never have existed.
Very few now.
Well, it's kind of growing.
Crazy communists.
Well,
no serious scholar would say that.
Ad hominems aside, yeah, there are those who maintain that the figure of Christ never existed. To me, what's the most important thing are the intersecting points on what was believed to have been said. So the word is more important than the person. So when we look at the word, what we find are ideas that could give us purpose and meaning in your particular world, but I just they don't resonate with me at all. But if we came together on common values, whether you derived yours from a religious point of view and I derived mine from a naturalistic, secularist point of view, as long as there are intersections, we should be able to get along just fine.
And I think that was what I was arguing at the end, get along. But I
think that's the most important.
Our cultures are going to be very, very different. I mean, you said someone does something wrong, your machinery is not working.
That's right.
I bet when your son was growing up, he must have done something. You didn't say to him, son, your machinery is not working. You probably said, you're wrong. You should not have done that. You were bringing in a moral responsibility and challenging him to be responsible.
Actually, I told him the machinery was not working.
Okay. All right. Now, if we do that in judgments and all sorts of things, that'll change.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamental to freedom is responsibility.
And I don't know how much responsibility or how much freedom we have. That's the central topic of my next book. I basically consider, if hard determinism is true, how should we reconsider
laws? That's right. As I said, atheists so far haven't given us the grounding for freedom. In other words, you're making nonsense of our Western democracy and a whole number of other things. And, Sam Harris has already argued that, hasn't he? Freedom's an illusion.
Yeah, well...
And certainly if you take scientific determinism...
He's one of many, and I think I like Sam, but I think he falls short.
Does it matter to you that humans are free?
Not really,
no. That doesn't really. Okay.
Not really. Because I don't think we have much choice if we aren't. You know what I mean?
We might get back to, that might be one of the upcoming questions, determinism, free will. You guys both now have brought up Jesus. And this is for Dr. DiCarlo. Somebody's asking, generally, have you looked into Jesus? And if you have, and if it was demonstrated to you that the death and resurrection of Jesus were true, the central claim of Christianity, not just the teaching, but the person, and his death, burial, resurrection, would you become a Christian?
Well, I was. So let that be, stated for the record. And what I often find with various Christians that I meet, I'll say I was a Catholic, and they'll go, "Oh, well, there's the problem." And it's like, whoa, okay.
No.
Okay. So I'm quite familiar with Christianity. I was an altar boy for 5 years. Never once propositioned by a priest, just putting that one out there. They were all fine men. They were all... pillars of They were good people. And I thought about entering the priesthood at one point in my life. I thought it was, because it was well respected, and I got to tell you, I wouldn't have stayed with the Catholic faith much longer had it not been for Jesus Christ Superstar. I'll tell you that, because I'm a drummer, right? And that actually spoke to me, on ways that no other, the catechism and nothing could. So, like I said, if the evidence presents itself and it's overwhelming to me, then I would have to follow it. A lot of you will say, Jesus entered into my heart. And that's where I say, that's where the needle drops. Listen for the drop. Wait for the drop. Because people will talk logically and whatnot, but then it'll just drop and they'll say, well, Jesus entered my heart, now I'm a Christian. I've never felt that. I'm not saying I will never feel that. And I have devoted some time to reading into it and looking for it. And so I am, actively seeking that. So don't think I'm shutting that possibility off in my life. I'm not, because you're probably thinking, oh, the atheist guy up there, if only Jesus had entered his heart the way he entered mine, he would see the world the way we do and realize the error of his ways. So
I don't think many of us would make that an argument, Chris. In other words, what they're saying is very real as an experience.
Well, I think the experience is real, but I think it's reducible to neurotransmission.
But the fundamental reason to believe is the conviction that it's true. In other words, it's not true because it works. It's not true because we experience it. It's not true because I feel it. I feel it, or it works, or I experience it because it's true.
Like the death and resurrection. Is that what we're talking about?
Including that, absolutely.
Okay.
In other words, my bet is we don't know each other well.
Right.
But when you say you were an altar boy, were you a real, you don't have to bare your soul here, a searcher at that stage? I mean, when I was 18, I spent 2 years thinking it through, and I'm thinking of C.S. Lewis, and but his reading the Gospels, which was the final thing, was at the end of 10 or 12 years of searching as an atheist. And he had the signals of transcendence and started to search and look at all sorts of things.
Sure.
And this was only the clincher. And, without putting you on the spot, were you as an altar boy passionate to discover from the Gospels if Jesus was who he said he was?
I think,
or were you,
I think to some degree, but also you got to realize I didn't have to search too much because we were Catholic and therefore right. So, I mean that, I'm not being disingenuous. Usually when you have a supernatural or metaphysical view, of course you're going to think you're right. Riddle me this, Oz. If the death and resurrection of Jesus is so crucial to Christianity.
The crux.
Yeah, the Christ. And he was a part of God. He was the physical manifestation of God. What was he dying for? Original sin? Forgiveness of humans? But God, being omniscient, would have known 1 billion years in advance what was going to happen to humans. So here's an analogy. If I tinker with AI in my off time, and I built a couple of robots in my basement, a couple of androids, and I knew all the aspects of all of their constraints, and I released them into my backyard, and I can say, you go into my backyard, and you can do whatever you want. Just don't eat the mangoes off of my mango tree. But yet I program them to love mangoes, you see? And I know in advance they are going to take the mangoes from my tree. Why should I be surprised when they do so? In that case, I am somewhat omniscient. I know what they're going to do. Therefore, why would I have to make a part of myself to go to forgive their original sins that I was the original causer of? That's what I don't get about the whole death and resurrection.
Chris, you know very well, though, that equally great philosophers like Alvin Plantinga and so on have explored that free will defense, and you could engage that at that very weighty level, which few of us in the room could follow. But at the heart of it is the notion that freedom matters to things like love and responsibility, and that God took the risk of creating free people. And you have in the Bible the only solid grounding for human freedom. So the Greeks had no freedom. Fate, Sophocles. The Indians have no freedom. It's a sense of karma driving things. And now, increasingly, scientific determinism is undermining human freedom. And one of the only clear places you have is in the explication of Jews and Christians. For example, Rabbi Sachs and his discussions of this. So It's an incredibly important thing. Are humans free? Do we have responsibility? Can we freely love? And if you say no, and your skepticism is the other point, we'll get into that, and that's why planting this discussion is so important, you undermine incredibly vital things.
Yeah, like an all-knowing God
No.
that can allow somebody to be free. It would
No,
be,
well, you're
don't-
just putting one side of the issue against the planters.
yeah. See, if I'm an
you need
all-knowing
to-
God, I'm looking at your life like you look at a DVD. You know, spoiler alert, at the end of Jaws, the shark dies. I know. Now, we watch that movie, the ending's not going to change. Us watching that movie is like an omniscient God watching our lives. It will play out like a DVD. How can you have freedom if the God is not only omniscient, knows everything, but omnipotent, made the universe such that it would constrain you to act in that very way? Why then should that God be angry or upset or want to punish
But
or
that
want
is
to reward
not
you?
either the Jewish or the Christian view. No, it's not.
So you're not defining God as omniscient? God is not all-knowing?
Yeah.
He's not
But
all-knowing.
he's made.
He is or he isn't?
Put it this way. If you go to Exodus 3, the famous disclosure of monotheism, the normal English translation is, I am who I am. But the Jews rightly point out, the Hebrews is, I will be who I will be. And the stress is on the absolute freedom of God. And then the problem becomes, if you expand on that, if he then makes people who are free, he has to limit his own freedom, and there's a huge discussion of that. But the basic where they come out is a free God has created humans who are free, but he doesn't constrain us to act in certain ways. And that's why it's a long discussion, and you need to have it with your fellow philosophers.
I have a great deal of trouble with that, but I think we should all know about that. We should know about these types of tensions. I think,
but we should equally know that there's almost no defense of freedom today outside the Jewish and Christian faiths.
Well, Muslim, Islam, I would say.
No, well, you have a huge amount of fatalism in Islam, inshallah.
Inshallah. With this, what is, this is a question, I guess, for Oz, and this will just go, you get to, this is your chance to preach here, I guess, this person is setting you up.
You're the
what
preacher,
is
Dan.
the
I'm not
hope
the preacher.
for humanity, and is there hope for humanity?
Well, in the Christian view, Jesus has stepped in and offers us rescue here and now. But the full completion, the day when the last tears will be wiped away, etc., there'll be true justice and so on, will only be on his return within the Christian understanding. In other words, we are not utopian, that by our efforts here and now, we're going to produce a perfect world. That was the Enlightenment, expansion of that. So you have the first coming of Jesus and the radical intervention, and then you have the second coming of Jesus when there will be the complete rescue and the fulfillment of passages like, Isaiah and so on.
What is the hope for humanity, and is there a hope for humanity?
There's hope for humanity as, essentially biological meat puppets. What we can do is we can look at all of the workings within us. We can look at ourselves from the point of view of how science best understands the world, how we as individual organisms, very mechanistically driven organisms, abide by those constraints. We can set values for ourselves, and the greatest responsibility and the greatest hope for humanity will be in our capacity as these types of beings to try to recognize when the clockwork orange is not functioning as it should. That is about as free as we can possibly get, so that when we start to say things like, I really feel as though I want to have sex with young children, and the values say, no, you should not, then the most responsibility, the greatest responsibility to us, the greatest freedom we could ever express at that point would be to try to seek help, to change the machinery in some way, to alter the constraints in other ways to facilitate rehabilitation for that person.
Because, as you know, there's a paedophile liberation movement now. No, they want to change the values. They don't think the clock working badly at all. But to go back
some do.
to the future
Some
of
do.
humanity,
Yep.
in my reading of many of the great atheists, Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal, 50-50 will survive civilization this century. Martin Heidegger, only a God can save us now. In other words, a lot of the discussion that I read is that we can't do it with Homo sapiens as we are now, so we've got to move towards the post-human future, and sort of Ray Kurzweil's singularity and things like that, and we'll move beyond humanity. Is that part of your worldview too?
It may be the eventuality of humanity that we will become transhuman. I mean, we're all, many of us are going to be cyborgs pretty much by the time we're dead, given the age of the demographic of some of the people here. That's to say artificial eyes and hips and limbs and that kind of thing.
X-Men.
I don't know about genetic mutations, although that most certainly is going to happen. Why have an artificial joint if you can just regrow a new one? It's going to be an interesting next 20 to 30 years in terms of how we are going to evolve culturally as a species. I've just finished writing basically a paper about AI and what we should kind of look out for in the future. Yeah.
This next question really gets to the heart of it, I think, in what you just observed. When we're within a moral society that has built mechanisms based on our shared values, we can say wrong, right, good, evil. In a atheistic framework, what is evil according to atheism? And
Right.
I'll ask you that, and then the second question, I guess, would be more directed to Oz. Why does God let innocent children suffer? So what is evil within the Christian worldview? So I'll let you both speak to evil. You can go first.
I don't see evil as being something objective out there in the world, that's personified as Satan in certain religions and that sort of thing. Evil is humanity's inability to keep up with the values it has placed in its kind of positive realm. So if a person cannot keep up to the values that are placed within a given society, they are considered evil. As we know in different parts of the world, some acts are valued and with considerable positive value, and some have considerable negative value. And it gets tricky, We see an elderly person fall in the rain, and we go and we help them up, right? And if we saw the same thing and we watched a person go over and then kick that person while they were down, we would be shocked. Yet if we went to places throughout the world, certain countries in Africa, if a woman was to fall and you were to go and help her up, this would be seen as a great injustice to her because she is the one who must take care of herself. And by you doing that, you're demeaning her. Many locals, many of the villagers would have said you would have been better off kicking her while she was down. So what is good here and bad here, you see when we go to another part of the world. That's not to say there's just total cultural relativity, but we need to be aware of those nuances. So when we throw out these terms evil, we have to be careful, with these broad brushstrokes that all of these acts are evil. For example, just consider this, the noble Nazi. I mean, that must sound bizarre to you. What do you mean a noble Nazi? What do you think Nazis at the end of the day went home and slapped their wives around and kicked the dogs and punched their children? And no, they were caring people involved in an overall very nasty enterprise. They themselves were a part of a system, the overall system itself being what you would call evil, or just, it's wrong because they're generating harm and our tolerance dips down. You do not have the right to cause that kind of harm to other people. Therefore, we have the right to stand up and oppose that. But evil itself as this kind of objective thing out there, that's a tricky one to find.
Just to follow up, who gives you the right? How do you derive that right?
We collectively in a society decide what are our values, what do we maintain overall, are the types of values that we give the thumbs up and the thumbs down to. We determine that ourselves. Yeah.
I'm back. Yeah, you're back, I think, to the cut flower civilization. And it takes a Nietzsche. Humility, mercy, these are the herd. We've got to have a transvaluation of values so that the hero's values, might makes right, etc. And we know what happened to that. But anyway, let me answer you put the tough one to me. Sure. There's no question that evil and suffering are the greatest. I was brought up with incredible realism. I was born in World War II, as Jen said. We were in a famine with Japanese army on one side. They killed 17 million in their invasion. We had the communist army above us and the nationalist army on the third side. And we were caught in a famine, my family and I. 5 million died in 3 months. 10 million were refugees on the road as we had to walk. My brothers died. My mother was a doctor. She was useless without food or medicine. And it was in that nightmare she thought through and brought me up later with a very realistic view of suffering. And as I see it, this is far too briefly. The deepest objection to the Christian view of suffering is the so-called trilemma. Is evil really evil? Is God really all good, and is God really all-powerful? Do you put the three together? The obvious answer is to relax one of them. Evil isn't that evil, but it really is. God, maybe there's a shadow somewhere, but if you have a shadow anywhere, how do you trust him? Or maybe he's not all-powerful. That's what Rabbi Kushner said, why do bad things happen, and so on. I think the Bible, and this I wrestled through in the light of a lot of suffering, the Bible stresses all three. Evil's very evil. God is all good. And he's in control and knows what he's doing. How do you put them together? The Bible gives a little twist to each of them, which turns them from a dilemma into a reassurance. Evil is evil, but it should have been otherwise. You can be angry at it as Jesus was without being angry at what is. Secondly, and I'm putting it far too briefly, is God all good? Yes, and no other God has wounds. You take someone like Dostoevsky, passionate about the problem of evil, and looked at the painting of the descent of Jesus by Holbein from the cross for hours. And at the end of it, he said, I don't know the full answer to the problem of evil, but I do know love. And many, many people is looking at Jesus' suffering on the cross that was the proof of God. We can never go so low, but God has not gone lower to reach us. The third one's harder to say in a sentence or two, but my own tutor at Oxford, Basil Mitchell, put forward a famous parable, the parable of the resistance fighter. And to put it simply, I can't tell you the story, and there's not time, but even J.L. Mackie and A.J. Ayer admitted he'd answered the problem. So if we had time, you could look at all three of those. I think the Christian can answer the trilemma. Viktor Frankl finished the thing I mentioned earlier. Can there be a God after Auschwitz? He said it was the atheist intellectuals who committed suicide. There was no why. Primo Levi and others. And then he said, if you have a small fire, a little breeze can blow it out. He said that's an inadequate faith, which many people have. If you have a big fire, a big wind will make it even bigger fire. That's true faith under the challenge of suffering. When I read that in Frankl, I thought, that was my mother. She would always say, in the nightmare, any of you have seen the film Back to 1942, it is horrendous. And the rape of Nanking was incredible. We lived there. It was in that nightmare that my mother's faith, as she often said, became unshakably real. And I don't know an answer that matches the Christian faith in terms of looking at evil in the white of the eye.
We are going to thank you guys very much. I have appreciated this dialogue. Going the back and forth was great. We don't often get things like this where we can just sit and chat with an audience. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to bring up Jen. She has got some announcements.
Pleasure.
Can we? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan.